Hello, YouTube family. Another episode of my Bald Intellect channel. Again, if you like the videos, please like, please subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And this episode, I'm going to be talking about the snowstorms in Texas. There are snowstorms across most of the United States, from Texas to the Northeast. But Texas was in the news a lot because they had it particularly difficult in Texas. A lot of people without power, millions of people without power, millions of people without water, and 2 to 3 dozen people dying from the debacle in Texas. And I just want to make sure that we discuss what is going on there. And it is horrible storms, power failed, you had water pipes burst, and I just want to make sure, and some people will criticize me, I'm sure, for what I'm going to say. I want to make sure people understand what the problem is, particularly if you live in Texas, if you have a friend in Texas, family member. Please make sure they understand what the problem is with why this kind of thing is happening in Texas. And that is because they have a penchant to vote Republican. And that's why I'm saying some people will criticize me for what I'm saying. It's just some partisan hack criticism, which isn't true. Just isn't true. The thing is, the problems Texas have are uniquely related to their penchant to vote Republican. I'm going to go over that piece by piece, one of which is Texas, for the most part, is not connected into the national power grid, something that was done intentionally. I mean, if you think about ideologies Republicans push, it's stuff like power independence. So Texas, not wanting to be called on to help other people out. If other people had issues, chose for the most part not to be connected to the national power grid. I believe by Juarez, Mexico, El Paso. I believe El Paso is. And El Paso didn't suffer the kind of problems the rest of the state had. Because they were connected to the national power grid, they were able to get help from other neighboring states and not have it as bad as far as the power outages and stuff. The other problem Texas has, and you'll hear a lot of right-wingers on cable news, places like Fox News, Newsmax, possibly some of the online talkers like the Ben Shapiro's, claiming that because windmills failed in Texas, because solar power plants failed in Texas, that renewable energy is the problem and that it's somehow proof that the Green New Deal wouldn't work. Which isn't true. As people have pointed out, you have plenty of cold weather areas, places that have severe cold weather, way worse than what Texas experienced this winter, in places like Greenland, that have plenty of windmills that survive the winter because they're winterized. Another problem you have in Texas is that's related to voting Republican is Texas is heavily private power companies, private businesses, private for-profit businesses that run the power in Texas. You have places like I believe it's called Midland Energy. You have the gas company that's owned by Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys. It's turned him into a billionaire. And you have these private companies that run the power grid. Another thing with Republicans is the government shouldn't run anything. Everything should be private, free market. Let the free market run and operate. The free market solves all problems. And that's one of the problems. You have a free market, private business power companies in Texas that aren't going to spend the money to winterize, aren't going to spend the money to upgrade the power grid because it doesn't benefit their profits. I mean, you look at the situation, The last time they had a storm like this was 10 years ago in 2011. Same problems. You had regulators saying you need to upgrade your power grid, you need to winterize, you need to do these things. And the Republican lawmakers in Texas weren't going to require it because that would be regulation. Another thing you hear commonly with Republicans, deregulate. We don't want to put in regulations that control the private business, that control the free market. Let the free market operate on its own. The problem with that is these power companies aren't going to spend the money to upgrade the power grid. They're not going to spend the money to winterize. Because if they don't do it, they're just making profits. If they spend all these tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to winterize, to upgrade the power grid, that's coming out of their profits. So as long as you don't have regulation forcing them to do it, they won't do it. I mean, you had that executive for Jerry Jones's gas company making the comment that this disaster in Texas is like hitting the jackpot. Because where they do have power operating in Texas, they're jacking rates up. You're hearing people with $5,000, $6,000 power bills because another thing is with the Republicans running Texas, they've given the businesses the ability to price gouge. And so that is, if the commodity is limited, if the resource is scarce, they can jack prices up. And so people who do have power are now getting shocked with these massive power bills. And that is all deregulation. All that stuff could be put under control by the state of Texas if the politicians would regulate, or if they would just have the state run the power. So they're not worried about profits, they're just worried about providing the service. And that's what the problem is in Texas. The problem is forever, for all my life, they've been voting heavily Republican. You've got a Republican legislature, a Republican governor. The largest single donor for the current governor, Abbott, for the previous governor, Perry, for the governor before that, George W. Bush, was this Midland Energy, a private energy company in Texas, donates millions and millions of dollars to these people so that they will not regulate it. These power companies look at it as, we have this disaster, people die, we don't care about people's lives, all we care about is profit. And the thing is, if we spend the money to winterize, how does it help us? It comes out of the profits we make, whereas during these disasters, we get federal tax dollars as bailout money to help us make it through this disaster, and then we're back to business as usual. In Texas, they usually don't have harsh winters like this. But when they do, it's a disaster because you have Republicans running the entire state. You have deregulation. You have their absence from the national power grid. You have the private companies running the power grid. They're not going to winterize. They're not going to upgrade the power grid. And every time there's a storm like this in Texas, it's going to happen the same way. You're going to have people who are going to die. People are going to die for the sake of profit. And it's not going to change unless you start mixing your state legislature up more. Elect a Democrat governor and see if you get something better out of it. I mean, elect an independent governor, a libertarian governor, somebody that's not going to do this stuff. I mean, the thing is, it's your own doing in Texas because you keep voting for Republicans who keep doing the same thing. They're not changing. They're not going to change. They get paid too much money by these private companies. And obviously the politicians don't care about your lives. The private companies certainly don't care about your lives. The private companies care about profits. The politicians care about the campaign donations they get from the private companies. And the system's going to keep running. And it's going to keep being bad, and it's not going to get any better. You know, the windmills can operate during the wintertime. There's windmills in the northeast United States dealing with harsh weather that operate during the wintertime. There's windmills in Iceland, in Greenland, that operate during the wintertime because they can be winterized. In Texas, they just don't do it. They don't deal with this kind of weather that often. But another thing you're hearing a lot from the right wing is this is a once-in-a-century kind of storm. And it's not. I mean, I assume they realize a century is 100 years. The last time they experienced something like this in Texas was 10 years ago. That's a decade, not a century. And the last time they had this kind of debacle in the winter weather in Texas before that was 89. I mean, you go back 100 years, a century, and you've had plenty of debacles like this in Texas, where they've had horrible winter storms that they're not prepared for. But now, we have plenty of technology to upgrade the power grid. We have, technology to winterize the power grid, the equipment. You have the state putting out subsidies to help homeowners if they can't afford to winterize their pipes, because that's the other problem. Pipes bursting left and right. And some people, maybe they can't afford themselves to do it. But there should be money set aside to help them if they can't. For people who can't afford it, then do it. If you can't afford it, there should be a subsidy for the state will send people in to winterize your pipes for you. That way you don't have this debacle and you don't have all these deaths when these storms happen. Because they're not once-in-a-century storms. They're happening more frequently. And because of climate change, it's going to continue happening more frequently because with this freak weather due to climate change, freak extreme weather. And so I want the people of Texas to know, change how you vote. If you hate Democrats, if that's, like voting, like supporting the other team to you, then vote an independent in, vote a libertarian in, somebody who will look at this objectively for the sake of people, instead of looking at it for the sake of, well, these companies give me a lot of money, so I've got to do whatever they want, which is they want their profits protected. I mean, that's what you got to change. And it's not going to get better in Texas unless you change it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Comments are welcome. And the video I played was a video from YouTube. It's TikToks people recorded in Texas. Link in the description if you want to check out that channel and check out the videos. Thanks again for watching. Have a good day.